Good morning, Beis, volume 77, top of 1177. And we're discussing Das, the role of Das as a connector, which interestingly is essentially another word for interface, a connector between Skashus and Ischabrus based on Hakora and Hargosha, because it internalizes and identifies and internalizes and integrates a higher level into a lower level, connects the person to the idea, and then in turn carries it to midas, to emotions. That's what it was in the human terms. Earlier, he also said it connects Chachma and Bina, but he didn't really elaborate on that. And then in a broader sense, it's Avedis Hashem, Avedis Hashem of bringing a contemplation, Hizbonanus, a divine contemplation into your personal life. And as such, it becomes a internalized and brings it to midas, kiyum hamidis, that the emotions are not just stimulated, but they also are sustained, perpetuated. Okay, so good. Then he said that Das also brings it into the world, Elokus in the world, which is what we're in the middle of now. So not just in the person of Avedis Hashem, Hamshachas Elokus, what he calls the exact words, Mamshich Giluiim ba'elam, and that's the yichud of Havaya and Elokim. Because Elokim is the godliness, the divine energy that manifests in existence. Havaya is the divine energy that's beyond existence, and Giluiim Havaya into Elokim, which in effect is going to be what he said, so we learned in the parentheses, it's had Das Tachten, what Das Tachten was in that regard. And after the parentheses, on top of 1177, that this is Avedis Adam, Lias Giluiim, Vedas HaNeshama. HaNeshama is the work of the Neshamas to bring in the worlds. That's the Tachlis Yeridus HaNeshama, to illuminate the darkness, which means the concealed divine that's existent in the world. In the parentheses, he made it clear that that's also the fact that it exists and the fact that it's possible to reveal Elokus, even in Das Tachten level, is also a Giluiim. But who actualizes that Giluiim? Who brings it to fore? Creation itself, there's existence. It's the Avedis Adam that recognizes the divine, starting from Adam Arishan, first Rosh Hashanah, when he said to the entire creation, "Boy, he basically elevated the whole world and revealed the divine. And that's the Aveda that we have throughout the generations, throughout history. Gili HaCheshach. Like Neir Hashem Nishma Sodom, the Neshama is like a Neiris, like a Neir, to do what? A Neir Hashem, to illuminate the Hamshel Gili Shem Havaya Be'elam. Okay. And that is the meaning when we say the yichud of Havaya and Elokim. I'm going to start here now. The fifth line from the top of the page, 1177. If you want to follow along in the text, go to ayinbeis.com. So, this is the yichud. When this in Kabbalistic terms, and Chassidus elaborates, like when you learn in the beginning of Shayachad Amunah, he says liyachid in the beginning, that this Shayachad is built on v'yedaita hayem v'shavesa levavecha ki Hashem hu ha'elokim. What does that mean? Hashem hu ha'elokim. If you translate that in English, it's God is God, the Lord is our God, God is our Lord. But Chassidus explains, and that Havaya and Elokim, the yichud, is the essence of all yichud. The mitzvah of the Yachid HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means that you're revealing Elokus, Ma Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Again, Hashem Elokeinu. Everywhere. Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu. Melech Ha'elam. Havaya Elokim. Those references are all indicating on the yichud of Havaya and Elokim. He says that's the Giluiim of Havaya into existence. Now, specifically, it's Havaya and Elokim because Elokim is the energy that sustains existence. If there's no Havaya and Elokim, it's not going to come into the world. So existence is permeated when Havaya and Elokim are united. Then basically, it's like saying that the divine that's beyond existence is becoming revealed in divine that's within existence, which, as he said at the top of the page, is concealed both from us and also itself. It's in a state of concealment because it has to manifest and relate to existence. So that's Yichud Havaya Elokim, L'hamshach Giluiim Havaya b'Shem Elokim. That's where we stopped. Okay. Now we're going to get into, if you remember, the beginning of this section on the top bottom of page 1175. He says just like there's 2 days Lamaila. Das Tachten also in Odom. The person has to have these two perspectives, and that's Yichud Elah, Yichud Tata, and he began Yichud Havaya Elokim in 2 Efanim. But he never spelled out what the 2 Efanim are. Now he's going to spell it out. So this is continuing from where he began. After explaining Das, the role of Das, he's now going to go back that there's 2 ways that Havaya and Elokim be connected. The 2 ways is pretty straightforward. Either Havaya is being Nimshach and Elokim, or Elokim is seeing Havaya. So he's going to explain these 2 ways, and that's ultimately going to be Yichud Elah and Yichud Tata. I'll read it inside so we'll understand it clearly. But again, it's following up where he began on the bottom of page 1175, where this Maimer 141 began. That's what he's now going back to. So he already mentioned the 2 Efanim. So what are the 2 Efanim? And this Yichud of Havaya and Elokim, the 2 tracks of divine energy, which you could, in broad terms, you could say the Primus Akav, Chesenius Akav, everything that we applied, Ayin of Yeshamiti, Ayin of Yeshanivra, can now be applied to this Havaya and Elokim. He doesn't specify it specifically here. We'll see where he goes with it. But generally, wherever you can apply those 2 levels that we spoke about, the Primus of the Etzem of the Pnimi, the Spashus of the Pnimi, the Habligvul, Hagvul. However you want to, he's going to apply it mostly in Pnimi, but the 2 levels. So this is 2 levels of Yichud. Again, Yichud means essentially connection, a unification, which of course is the whole theme of Ayin Beis, Yichud, the interface that connects. And what are the 2? Yichud Elah. So Yichud Elah is a term you've heard many times. It means the higher unity. And Yichud Tata literally means the lower unity. It's similar when you say Das Elyon, Das Tachten. Yichud Elah, Yichud Tata. A higher, Tehir Elah, Tehir Tata. In the Chassidus and the Kabbalah as well, you find quite often you talk about the Elah and the Tata. The same thing is in a higher level and a lower level, the same word. So Yichud Elah, Yichud Tata. Okay. And what are they? What are these 2 levels, these 2 Efanim, these 2 methods and ways of uniting? He says, the Hein Habeis Shiluvim, these are the 2 interweavings. Shiluv comes from the word to interweave. The Shiluv, the interweaving, the interconnection between the Shiluv Havaya, the Shiluv Havaya ba'Adnai, the Shiluv Adnai ba'Havaya. I will explain what that means. So there's the Shiluv Havaya, how Havaya is interwoven into Adnai, and how Adnai is interwoven into Havaya. Now remember, we learned a few pages back, the Adnai and Havaya is basically how you read it, how it's written, and how you read it. We don't today, it's 2 separate things. We don't read Havaya the way it's the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. We don't say that. Only the Kohen Gadol did that in the Shem HaMeferish, in the Yom Kippur, in the Kodesh Kedoshim. We don't pronounce it that way. We pronounce it Adnai. Also, not exactly Adnai. Adnai is a way of a little twist, so we shouldn't say the word, the holy name. So we pronounce it Adnai. So Havaya and Adnai are interesting, 2 different, they're both the same name, but one is how it's written and one is how it's pronounced. As we learned, Basilagani, this chapter 11, and the Rebbe's Maimer from Tafshir Chafal discussed that basically the difference is when it's written, it's the way it is. The way it's pronounced is the way it's Begili. Havaya cannot be Begili in our world as it stands right now. Like he says in Tanya, And we're going to learn in a minute in the parentheses that Adnai and Elokim are interchangeable. It's going to explain in the parentheses in a moment that Elokim is how Adnai, how Malchus is in Atzilus, and Adnai is how Malchus is in Biyah. So right now, for all practical purposes, Adnai and Elokim come together. That's why he's using the Shiur of Havaya Adnai to explain the Yichud of Havaya and Elokim. But we'll get to that in a minute. Let's just talk about Havaya Adnai a bit more. So Tanya, he says, Shemesh Shemogan Hashem Elokim. If the sun were to shine without any filter, it would completely annihilate and overwhelm existence. So Shemesh Shemogan Hashem Elokim. So Elokim is like the Mogan, the sheath, the filter, the cover, the case, however you translate it. But it's definitely a level that does some concealing. So when you say Havaya, you're talking about Elokus in its pure form. When you say Adnai or Elokim, you're saying Elokus as it's in a state of concealment or in a state of being channeled, filtered. Again, whatever word you use is the same idea. But now comes the question, the connection between them. Remember that Yud Kei Vav Kei has 4 letters. Adnai has 4 letters. So in the Kabbalah, there's a discussion of how Havaya and Adnai interact with each other. Because Havaya, since Adnai is the pronunciation of Havaya, meaning it's the way Havaya becomes revealed to us. So think of Adnai like the shades, but it's also a name of God. It's a name of God that God is using, the Koyach HaGvura, the Koyach HaHelam, Hein Hein Gvuresav. So just like there's the God as he reveals, there's the God also as he conceals. So how do Havaya and Adnai interact with each other? Is it just Havaya is here and Adnai is here, and it just shines through Adnai like a filter? The answer is no. There's a shiluv between the two of them. And that's ultimately the goal. Because remember, the goal is not to remain concealed. You want that one day when Mashiach comes, it says, that there should be kishem shani nichtav kachani nikra. That Etzem of Havaya, that right now cannot be pronounced and revealed, should be revealed. So therefore, you want Havaya and Adnai to join with each other. Right now, the way they join is that Adnai conceals. So in the Yichud, in the connection, Havaya and Adnai there's a shiluv. What's a shiluv? The Yud of Havaya relates with the Aleph of Adnai. The Hey of Havaya relates to the Daled. The Vav relates to the Nun. And the last Hey relates to the Yud. So a shiluv means that it's the name Havaya, but so it's either shining through the 4 letters of Adnai or the other way around. And that's what the difference is between the 2 shiluvs. The question is, which one dominates? If it's shiluv Havaya ba'adnai, he's going to say after the parentheses, that if it's shiluv Havaya ba'adnai, if it's shiluv Adnai ba'Havaya, so Havaya is the dominant one, and Adnai is the secondary one. That's the higher yichud. If it's shiluv Havaya ba'Adnai, Adnai is the main one. So, one more point I want to make. In Kabbalah, when it talks about the shiluv, sometimes interestingly, it also comes down to, as I said, the dominant one. So in a way, it's Yud Aleph. The full shiluv would be Yud Aleph, Hey Dalet, Vav Nun, and Hey Yud. That means basically that they're both interwoven with each other. But the question is, which one is dominant? Is it Aleph Yud, or is it Yud Aleph, meaning the first letter of Yud Kei Vav Kei is dominant, or is the Aleph of Adnai dominant? We'll see that in a minute. Let's first do the parentheses. So bottom line, just for all practical purposes, a shiluv is 2 entities that interact, interweave with each other, and they produce something. Now, in the creation process, it's a concealment. But in Aveda, when you do the Yichud, there's Havaya and Adnai working with each other. And the question is Havaya being revealed in Adnai, or is Adnai being revealed in Havaya, so to speak? And that's going to be the difference between the two levels of Yichud. So let's read it inside, and then if it still needs explanation, I'll be happy to explain further. But now he wants to qualify. You're telling me it's Yichud Havaya Elokim. How do we suddenly introduce Adnai? It's another name. Adnai and Elokim are not the same name. So he says the following in the parentheses. V'yadua the Adnai Elokim hem inyan echad. It's known that Havaya and Adnai and Elokim are one inyan. So then why are they two different names? Or beprotius, because when you break it down in detail, Shem Adnai hu Shem Islabish bebriya. The name Adnai is the way Elokus goes into the world of Bria. The Shem Elokim hu Kamashu B'Atzilus Adayin. Shem Elokim is the name as it's still in Atzilus, meaning that it's preparing to go into Bria, but it's not in Bria yet. Remember, we learned a lot about Malchus and Atzilus, and that same Malchus goes through the Parsa, and it goes into Bria. So in general, it's one entity. But the difference would be, when you break it down, Elokim is the name for it when it's still in Atzilus, as Atzilus prepares to create and to carry the energy into Bria. And Adnai is the name you use when it's already in Bria. That's what he says. So that's a rule. That's the klal. U'mekol mokim, and nevertheless, even though we say that this is the way it is, mekol mokim ksiv b'reishis bara Elokim. It doesn't say b'reishis bara Adnai. It says b'reishis bara Elokim. Harihoya heyesavas ha'idei shem Elokim. So in other words, even though when you break it down, it's two levels, but when we associate creation, we associate it to Elokim. Because the real creation, Shem Elokim, in other words, is the fullest, is the name we use, the predominant name we use in creation. What he's qualifying here with this is probably saying that Elokim is the main name and Adnai is a specific element as it goes into Bria. That's what it sounds like he's saying. I'm not positive what he's adding. But bottom line is, Elokim and Adnai both relate to creation. Havaya is above creation. The difference is this. So now we know why he could use Shilav Havaya and Adnai and Yichud Havaya and Elokim in the same breath, in the same context. Because the bottom line, you want to connect Havaya, something beyond, to Elokim, or to Adnai, in general one, or all the way into Bria, basically. So you want to bring Havaya not just into Elokim as it's in Atzilus, but Havaya also into Adnai as it is in Bria. The question, an interesting question that would come up is, so why is the case that Adnai seems to be closer to Havaya than Elokim? Because it's the pronunciation of Havaya today. We pronounce Havaya Adnai. We don't pronounce Havaya Elokim. So Elokim seems to be, in other words, much more different than Havaya. That's an interesting question. Here it seems Adnai is lower Elokim than Elokim, because Adnai is in Bria, Elokim is still not Atzilus. Just a thought. So I'm not sure. I have to look into that, why that would be the case. But regardless, as I said, because Adnai sounds like more like Havaya and Adnai are working with each other, the Shiluv, because they correspond with each other. Elokim is a completely different name. Not sure about that, but I'll get back to you once I do a little research. If anybody has learned anything about it, would be helpful. I mean, it's not really about guessing. It's about really looking what the explanation for that would be. Okay, fine. Now he goes back to Shiluv. What's a Shiluv? So what's the difference? If you look in Tanya, in Shaykhad Amunah chapter 7, he talks about this. He talks about the Shiluv Havaya Adnai and Adnai Havaya. So you may have already learned it. If you learned it properly there, so he says like this, V'yadua, what's the difference between the two Shiluvim, the two ways they interweave? The Eis Harishin Hu HaGever. The first letter is the one that dominates when you are mishal of something. So let's put it in simple terms. Let's say you're baking a cake. It has primary ingredients, but then you want to mix in other ingredients. So who determines what's dominant? Whatever came first, obviously, is the main dominant part of it. And then you mix in to sweeten it, to spice it, and so on. So Shiluv is determined what's being mixed in and what's there originally. So in this case as well, the first letter that is the dominant letter. Hu HaGever. So therefore, Valkain. Kasher Shiluv Hu Adnai B'Havaya. In other words, it starts with Havaya, but now you're mixing Adnai B'Havaya. Adnai is now being interwoven into Havaya. In other words, you begin with Havaya, and now you're introducing Adnai. So there, what's the Reish Harishin that dominates? The first letter, who hayud, the Shem Havaya, because that was there. You have Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now you're mixing in Adnai into it. You're being Mishal of Adnai. The Yud was there as the first letter, so it's the Gavit, it's the dominant letter. So Harizeh his Gabrus Havaya al Adnai. That's his Gabrus of the Havaya and Adnai, because the first letter is the one that shines most dominant. However, Adnai is doing something to it, because it's definitely changing the properties and the ingredients and the quality of Havaya, because it's not pure Havaya now. It's Havaya using Adnai. V'zeh b'chinas yichudei elah. That's yichudei elah. Why? Because the dominant is Elokus, like the Ayin of the Yesh Hamiti. But the Ayin of the Yesh Hamiti, so to speak, is looking through the lens of Adnai. So it's, yes, Adnai has had impact, but the dominant is still Yichudei Elah, the higher Yichud. We're going to learn about what Yichudei Elah means, so be patient. Then goes the other way around. This is just an introduction to just state the two levels of Yichud. Ukasher Shiluv hu Havaya ba'Adnai. And here what's Havaya ba'Adnai? Adnai is the dominant. Ha'esh Harishon hu Aleph, the Adnai. There, the first letter that was there first is the Aleph of Adnai. Harizeh b'chinas yichud tata. That's yichud tata. It's still a yichud, because Adnai is a name of God, a godly name, but it's a yichud that's already driven, that existence first, I should say, Elokus that relates to existence first, and then you're introducing Elokus that's higher than existence. So basically, Das Tachten first, that's Adnai, and you're introducing Das Elyon into it. That's the Yichud of Havaya and Elokim, when the Shiluv Havaya ba'Adnai. The higher one, a Shiluv Adnai ba'Havaya, is it's Das Elyon first. And Das Tachten is how Das Elyon is traveling through Das Tachten. Basically, what he's going to explain soon, more at length. So therefore, you have both two different Yichudim. It all begins, where do you begin? Do you begin with Elokus that's higher than existence, or do you begin with Elokus that's within existence? That would be the two methods of Yichud here. And of course, that's going to come V'yedaita hayim v'shavei salach ki Hashem Elokim. V'yedaita. V'yedaita, to have that idea that is kashus, is chabus of these two levels, in these two ways. So that ends this paragraph. But he didn't explain what the yichud exactly is. That's going to be va'inyanhu in the next section. But before I continue, let's pause for a moment if anybody wants to clarify anything or ask something or comment. If not, we just move forward. Okay. So now he's going to explain what is this exactly, this yichud. What does it mean? But the ideas that we're going to learn are not going to be completely new. One second. The ideas we learn are not going to be completely new because... One second. The ideas we learn are not going to be completely new because obviously we've already talked a lot about Das Elyon and Das Tachten. And we haven't discussed how they join together. So far we talked about them as two perspectives, one from the bottom up and one from the top down. But that's going to come now into play as we talk how they come together. But let's as I said, patience, and we'll go through it. Someone wants to ask something? Or comment? No? Okay. Let's continue. So I'm on page 1177.
Why is Adnai and Elokim the same? He said that it's not the same.
Did you read the parentheses? I just explained the parentheses. You just explained.
I for a minute I couldn't hear.
Well, just go back to the parentheses. V'yadua, the Adnai v'Elokim hem inyan echad.
Yeah, but he said Elokim is Atzilus and Adnai is in Bria.
No, then read on. Ubepratius. You have the Sefer in front of you?
Yeah.
Look, read the whole parentheses. In general, they're one, as I explained, because they're both Elokus as it relates to existence. Ubepratius, Elokim is in Atzilus, is still how it's in Atzilus. In other words, the Elokus, the Asar Mamora says they're still in Atzilus. And the Adnai is how it enters into Bria. And yet, in general, Bria relates to Shem Elokim. Bereshis Bara, Shem Elokim. That's what he probably wants to bavon. Because he just said Adnai is Bria, so why do you say Bereshis bar Elokim? Because the Bria begins already in Atzilus. Elokim is the force for creation. Okay, that's what he said. Okay, good. Okay? Continuing on. Good. Yeah. So we continue with the next paragraph now. Va'inyanhu. What is the inyan of these two yichudim? These two shiluvim? The shiluv of Adnai ba'Havaya and the shiluv of Havaya ba'Adnai. Yehine Shem Adnai. We have to explain now, what does Shem Adnai mean? I just want to mention that you may remember just a few pages back, on page 1171, at the end of the paragraph, he spoke about Havaya and Adnai, that medrash, the medrash, Ani Havaya Hu Shmi. And the Eibishter says, so what's going to be my name? The medrash in Bereshis Rabbah. Ani Mashmi Omrele, the Adam answered, L'cha no likris Havaya. To you it's appropriate and fitting to be called Havaya, L'fi sha'ata Oden, because you're a master. So he asked the question, what does Oden have to do with Havaya? So then call him Adnai. Why are you calling him Havaya? That's the question he asked there. And he said you can't say that he really means Havaya as he's pronounced, because he says, who's Shmi? That's Shmi, Havaya. And the Rebbe Rashab went on to explain different explanations, that for some places it says, in other places it says that it's called being Mamshich. He says these words, that Odem Arishan was Mamshich Havaya into Adnai, into Malchus. And there he brings, if you look there, he brings, because Adnai is Ant Ishtamude Oden Al Kula. You are known as the master over everything. He's going to now quote that. The reason I'm referring to it is because he said it already. And it's interesting. There he was bringing it. If you look, remember, he says, so he already said what he just said here at the bottom of page 1171. Okay. But then he said that that's Yesod Nira, the Rebbe Rashab said, it appears more to be the case that the reason he's called Shem Havaya is because of Havaya, not because of Adnai. So then why is the word Oden? So he said, because according to what he said there, that a name relates to a Zulas, Oden means there's already a master over something. Therefore, a Shaykh Shikreishcha b'Shem Shu Havaya. So there it's a different type of explanation, that because Havaya Shem Etzem, and the Shaykh saying Hashem, because since you're going to be a master over another, that's why it's appropriate to call you by name. Just pointing out, that's what he said there. It's not, the details are not all that relevant, but he began the discussion already earlier that Havaya and Adnai. But let's go back here now. She says, Va'inyanhu, the Shem Adnai, who Kamaimer, is using the same Maimer. Ant ishtamuda Oden al Kula. You, ishtamuda.
Ishtamoido.
Ishtamoida is from the word. It's begin the ishtamudim base. It's known as. I'm sorry?
It's impossible, Leo. Antishtamoido.
Yeah. Antishtamoida Oden al Kula. That you are known, or will be known. Ishtamoida is will be known, or you're known?
Known.
Known. You are known as being an Odain on everything. So the word Adnai comes from the word Odain. Odain in English is a master of the universe, when we say. Odain, Adain Haylam. When we say Adain Haylam, the master of the universe. What level is that in Ruchnius, in the Elamis, in the higher levels? Dibur Ha'elyan. This is the level of the supernal word, Dibra Elyon. Shenemar b'dvar Hashem shamayim nasu. So this is how Elokus is manifesting in a manner of, it's an expression, a manner of speech. Where b'dvar Hashem shamayim, b'dvar Hashem, not machshava, not thought, but how God is, the words of God, with the word of God, the heaven was created. That's sort of mamoris. It's all dibur. Havaya and Elokim. Veidaber. So dibur is the level of elokus that's related. That's not just relating to existence, but actually speaking existence. Like he says in Shiur Yichud V'Amunah, that the letters of God's speech and words vivify, energize, and sustain all of existence. So basically, he said two things here. Adnai is from the word Odin al Kula, and what is that? That's the Dvar Hashem, the level of Dibur Elyon, the speech, the supernal speech, the words of God. Didn't I just say that?
Yeah. I said what you said.
Okay, good. The Hine, Hadibur, why is he focusing on the word Dibur? So you may recall, we've already used Dibur a number of times as a moshel compared to Machshava, which is la'atzmei, and it's not disconnected from you. Dibur is lazulas, is another. And remember, zulas is an operative word, how God relates to another. That was, we talked about Machshava v'ano emlech. We talked about earlier Dibur as well. If you remember, there was Machshava, Keicha Machshava. But then, where was the last time he spoke about Dibur? A few pages back. I don't remember exactly. I'll have to look it up. But he spoke that... remember, Dibur is the level of Malchus. Keep that in mind as well. Malchus, and that's the Dibur. Here we are. Yeah. Actually, no, he doesn't use Dibur here. He just uses it for this. Okay. Yeah, page 1159. We talked about a bunch of levels. So he talked, what was he seeking there? The Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, he compared to Dibur on page 1159. Yeah, clear. Malchus, Mokel Biyah, Nivdal, Dibur Sheyetze v'Nifra Min Ha'Adam. So it's very relevant. I'm going to refer back to it soon, but that's a Dibur. Dihine hadibur ubchines nifrad min ha'adam yesher min ha'machshava. Dibur, which of course you could ask a question. What is this thing with Dibur? Why does God have to speak? He can't think. We learned before that machshava achas, he creates everything. Le machshavesai machshavesechem. Remember, there was a whole section, the bottom of page 1171, that his thought creates, as opposed to our thought. If we just think and don't speak, no one will know what we're thinking. But by the Eibishter, his machshava creates. So what's this thing of Dibur in the first place? Why do we need Dibur? The answer is, again, back to what we've been discussing. We need Dibur because on our terms, the Eibishter wants creation to be as closely as we can understand and relate to it. And for us, so the Eibishter chose to manifest in something that Dibur, he says, I'm not just going to think about you, I'm going to speak. I'm going to say words that you can have something to hold on to, that you can relate to me. So in other words, Dibur is the Eibishter's manifesting, Alikus manifesting and relating to another, just like Dibur by us relates to another. So no, he doesn't need it. He can do it through thought. He can also create a miracle that we should read God's thoughts, but he wants it to be bislapshus as much as possible. So Dibur, b'dvar Hashem shamayim nasu, and asar ma'amoris, Havaya and Elokim, again and again, is in order to manifest, which of course explains the whole Torah. Why do you need Vayidaber Elokim again and again? Vayidaber Elokim al Moshe Lemer, Vayidaber Elokim, and the Saros Dibur, because it all explains how Elikus is relating to us more than it is in Machshava, which is more how he relates to himself. So it's giving us a handle, something to hold on to, so to speak. So Dibur, therefore, is more nifred than Machshava. Again, nifred doesn't mean Chaz v'Shalom, it's still God's words. But nifred means that Machshava hagam shi gamkin levush ala nefesh Machshava, even though Machshava is also levush ala nefesh, which means it's not the Etzem nefesh, It's not even the keiches hanefesh. It's a levush. It's a garment. You express yourself. You express your mayach, your seichel through thought. It's also a levush. Levush hari ene atzmus hadover, and a garment is not the core entity. Ki'im k'moy dover acher hamalbish. It's another entity that is dressing up in clothing the initial entity. So let's talk about seichel for a moment. A person has seichel. Seichel is a koyach, a power. You could have millions of ideas. Machshav is the process that you take an idea and you put a garment on it called thought. You're now consciously thinking about one idea. You can take off that garment and then seichel can go into a different garment and you think about a different idea. So machshav is just a levush. It's like a jacket, except it's connected to us, but it's essentially you could change one thought to another. Ideas never change. Ideas are there. The question is whether they'll be expressed and revealed. So machshava, on one hand, is a levush, not etzem hadover. It's like a dover achar.
Rabbi?
One second. Let me, please hold your thought or write it down. I want to just finish the thought here. 1 second. Okay. I want to just stop a moment. Okay. I thought he's going to go straight to Dibur. There's going to be a pretty long discussion, relatively speaking, before the Rebbe Rashab goes back to Dibur, which is obviously the key theme he wants to discuss here. I'm just looking. Yeah. Dibur will be discussed in the next page. So we're going to go for almost a page and a half. Or, like almost somewhat of a page, a little more than a page, just about machshava. If you look on page 1178, in the second paragraph, he starts, Mashenken adibur. So I'm saying it in order let's get the flow right. He's not going back to dibur for a while. So he's going to be elaborating now on machshava. Now, of course, you could ask the question, don't you want to talk about dibur? Why are we talking about machshava? But the Rebbe Rashab, to understand dibur well, he wants to explain machshava well. So that way, you're going to have machshava and dibur. It may even be that machshava is more like Havaya, and dibur is more like Elokim or Adnai. Maybe not. Havaya may be higher than that. I'm not sure about that. So just bear with this. So right now, we're going to be discussing machshava for a while until we get to middle of next page. Okay, so just important for the navigation. I'm serving as the tour guide. So, when you're traveling, you think you're going to make a turn. We're right now going to go into machshava and discuss machshava, the levush of machshava, and then go back to dibur, which is Adnai. Adain al-kula. So, go ahead. If you want to ask something, go ahead. Now is good.
Yeah, my question is, when it says the machshava is levush al nefesh, why does he say use the word nefesh instead of neshama?
In general, these are interchangeable words, neshama and nefesh. It's like you say, remember there are 5 levels of the neshama. Hey, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chai, yechida. So in general, they're interchangeable. But when you speak more in terms of faculties, he usually says, you don't say keiches ha-neshama generally, you say keiches ha-nefesh, because you're referring to the nefesh of the neshama, which is the biological part. Nefesh, ruach, neshama. So the nefesh is the life. For example, when it says, vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim, so God infused, he breathed, nishmas, from the word nishima. So there he wants to focus on nishmas chayim, the chelik elikah, the so-called divine holiness of it. But then he says, vayikra adam nefesh chaya. He became, vayikra then, vayila adam nefesh chaya, became a living entity. When you talk more about the life force, you usually use nefesh. That's why nefesh is used in most cases when you're just talking about the life force or the faculties. When you use neshama generally, this is a general distinction, it's usually referring more to the divine element of the neshama. Nefesh alikis, but even nefesh alikis is not called neshama alikis, you call it nefesh alikis, interestingly. So nefesh is the so-called the more actionable part of the neshama, if you wish. Nihi, that's why you say nefesh ruach is midas, neshama is meichin, chai yechida is ratzon and tainug in makifim keser.
Also, so you're saying not just because it's a more general term, but because it refers to a more physical manifestation of
the more, I would say, the life force manifestation. When you're referring to it in a life force fashion, or in the faculties, you'll say koiches hanefesh. You usually won't say koiches haneshama. Koich haneshama would be more mesiras nefesh, to give your life. Koich haneshama would be the power to have love of God. Koich hanefesh is more the faculties of the nefesh, meaning the more actionable part of the soul, the human soul.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so now he's going, as usual, the Rebbe Rashab in his elaborate form, saying, so dibur is more nifred than machshava. But now he's going to qualify. Machshava is also a lavush, also not the etzem. So we're going to discuss now machshava, and then we're going to go back to dibur. So now comes a parentheses of a few lines, 3 lines. So he says, so generally, a lavush is like a dover achar. When you put on a jacket or a shirt, it's not part of who you are. So he's going to qualify that, because there are levushim that are part. If you remember, we learned about kidein kamsa, the levushim in bay, like a turtle or a snail, that the levush, its shell, is part of it. It's not an outside garment. It's not like a coat. It's not like it's actually part of it. And some animals, they don't even shed it. Some animals shed their shell and it regrows, but many don't. Some don't. Al Kaponim, he says, "V'yesh levush she'ena dover achar mahamelubish." There's also a garment. I just said that a garment is like a dover achar. He says there's also a garment that's not a separate from the melubish, from the one that's dressing in that garment. Rakshua ora mimenu. So then, why is it called a lavush? Because it's a reflection of the etzem. It's not the etzem, it's a reflection of it. Being it's a reflection, not a atzmi, not the core entity, that's why we call it only a garment. But it's a garment that's not separate. The example for that would be our skin, our skeleton. Our skeleton is not the etzem of the Adam. It's a lavush, but it's also not separate. You can't separate it from a human body. So it's only an outer shell, so to speak, an outer layer, but it's attached. It's not my example. This example we learned earlier in the human being. In the context of machshava and dibur, let's see what he's going to say. There's a lavush that's not detached, but it's still not the etzem either. So basically, there's a lavush that's detached. There's a lavush that's not detached. So with machshava, in this case, sometimes he actually uses machshava as being a lavush hamachuber, and dibur is lavush hanifred, because machshava is connected to you. When you're thinking, the thought doesn't separate from you. Dibur, the words separate from you. It's still your words, but somebody can record it, somebody hears it, etc. But here he's going the other side of it. The machshava, because it has oisius, because it's taking an idea from the mind or an emotion from the heart and dressing it up in words. That's he calls that's like a dover achar, a separate thing that's a garment to the thing that it's expressing. So the truth is, it's not a contradiction. Some places the focus is on machshava as it connects to its source, and some places the focus is on machshava as it's becoming letters already. That's why it's called a lavush. So here, interestingly, from here, right here, you can bring 3 levels of lavushim. You have a lavush that's attached, only ha'ara, it's a lavush. You have a lavush like machshava. He says here, it's like a separate thing because there's letters. And then there's a lavush of dibur that's really completely separate. The truth is there's 3 lavushim, machshava, dibur, maisa. Maisa is even more separate. But the bottom line is they're garments, and all of them are not the etzem. So he's just qualifying and filling in the picture of what lavush is. Now, the importance to the interface is obvious. There's no way, if I did not use my lavushim right now, of machshava, dibur, we wouldn't have a communication going on here. So basically, the lavushim are interfaces between who we are, our personalities, and our ideas and our feelings with each other. So machshava is the first step, because if you don't think, you can't speak. We're not talking about a drunk What they say is, "Was is auf lung is auf sung." Whatever's on his lung is on his tongue. But a sober person, intelligent person, a coherent person speaks according to their thoughts. So levushim are essential in relating to another. If we lived on an island and you were all alone, you wouldn't need dibur. I'm not talking about people speaking to themselves. There's that idea. But you wouldn't need dibur. Machshava you would need because you need to think. But the point is, if there's no other, at the end of the day, you can be a complete intact entity without levushim. But without levushim, there is no existence of another. So therefore, the Eibishter didn't just give us 10 keiches hanefesh, like he says in Tanya. Those are the 10 powers, the faculties. If they don't have levushim, they remain locked inside you. And machshava, dibur, and ma'isa are the three ways, the only three ways to express the faculties. What he's discussing here now is how separate are these levushim from us. So he's established machshava is a levush. In a case, it's like another thing because it already has letters. So the idea is no longer a pure idea. The ideas have been dressed up. I'm using that word very deliberately, into a garment of letters. That's what he says here. So, okay. And then he goes further, that not only is machshava a levush, that's so-called like a separate thing, it does not reveal everything that's in the nefesh. Umahu malbish harirak Giluiim shel nefesh. And what does this garment dress up? What is he dressing? Not the Etzem of the nefesh, only the Giluiim of the nefesh. So when we think consciously about any idea, it's not an expression of the Etzem, it's an expression of the Giluiim of the nefesh. So besides the fact that it's only a garment and not the entity itself, with machshava, it's also not revealing the entity itself. In a way, like when you dress in a garment, you actually conceal who the person is. Big day, malchus, levush malchus. So there, the garment reveals it's a king. But remember, a king can dress up in a garment of a peasant, and you wouldn't know who he is. So garment is not necessarily a revealer of the Etzem personality. It's a revealer of something, but it's not a revealer. It's atzmus ein shaykh levush. So Rabbi Rashab is adding. 1 second. Ooh. This parenthesis is a good 10-line one. 8 lines. 10 lines. Sorry, 10 lines. Yeah. Okay, so there's now going to be another qualification within the qualification. I just will say a comment here, because again, I said earlier, it seems like the Rebbe Rashab is digressing here. It's like a tangent. We want to talk about how Dibur is alo nifrad, and in contrast to machshava. So what are we going now into the whole analysis of machshava? But as always, once you learn it, you start discovering, it's going to be negated to the Havana of the whole Inyan. The only thing is we don't see it yet. So just bear, we're going to read it together and very patiently. But there's no question he's not digressing. This is going to be connected to the whole picture. I mean, we could already guess how, but I don't want to guess. So let's read on. I just want to point out that all these seemingly tangents are very b'kavana, and we'll figure out soon how they all connect. So now he's going to go into a discussion about, we talked right now that a levush is a separate entity. It could be attached, and it's only a reflection, like we just said in the last parentheses, or it could be detached, like it's detached. He says, kamoy dover acher. He doesn't say dover acher just for the record. He says, kamoy dover acher. Why? Because the letters, so to speak, are outside and separate from the idea. So the machshava has given us a garment, but the garment is like a separate thing. Now he's going another part, like we saw. What does machshava reveal? This garment, what part of us is dressing up? So he says it's not dressing the Etzem, it's dressing the Giluiim. Because the Etzem, now he's going into the parentheses, because the Etzem Ein shaykh levush. Levush is only possible over something that is subject to a garment. You can't dress up something that's not b'chlal shaykh to a garment. And that's what he's going to explain. Etzem is not shaykh to a garment. I'm not sure what he's going to say, but I just will say this. In Tanya, he says, the example by mitzvahs, that mitzvahs are levushim. But when you do a mitzvah, it's like embracing the king. So you're embracing his garment, but you're embracing the king that's within him. So levush is not a factor. Levush is only for us to relate to, but the king himself will relate to. So when you love somebody, you're connected to somebody, the levush is only the way that individual expresses himself, even to us. But the love transcends levushim. Can you put a garment on a person you love? Meaning, I don't mean dress him up. The connection to him, does the levush have any impact? If you love somebody, it doesn't matter how many garments they wear, or no garments, you're connected to them. Because the Etzem is not subject to Giluiim. And therefore, to gradations that levushim change. No, you love someone, it doesn't make a difference how they dress. I know some husbands will have an issue with that, and they feel that. But the truth is, if you really love somebody, you're loving the person. Doesn't matter what garment they put on, because the person doesn't change due to their garments, the Etzem person. The garments affect, not the Etzem. The Giluiim, yes. In the area of Giluiim, of expression, a mood, and so on. That's why we dress up. We don't go out in the street naked. And Shabbos and Yontif, it's a mitzvah to dress in big day Shabbos and Yontif, big day covered, because you're honoring. But it doesn't change the Etzem. It's just that today that the Giluiim have to be beautiful. When you work in the field, you dress certain garments. When you're sitting at a Shabbos table, you dress in different garments. That's all Giluiim. The Etzem Ha'adam is no difference in the field or outside the field. I remember I was by L'chaim, and there was the Bacher was, he was not dressed, let's put it this way, in festive garments. He was dressed like in modern garments. Rabbi Saul Friedman, all of us, Shalom, was there, and says to him, Chosin Deima Lamelech. A Chosin is like a king. So, like, in other words, he was hinting to him, why aren't you dressed in kingly garments, in royal garments? So the Chosin says, Melech Basada. That was the answer. The L'chaim was in the month of El. So he said, Melech Basada. When the Melech is in the field, he dresses a different garment. I just found it funny. Anyway, the point is that garments affect ispashtus, expression, not etzem. So let's read on now. As it's known, the Gambi Giluiim, so he says that not only etzem, even in the Giluiim, the primary role of garments is on the 7 lower levels of the spheres, the midas, starting from Chesed through Malchus. Al Gimel Rishenis lo yesh levushim. When the Gimel Rishenis, Chabad, Chochma bin Adas, there are no garments. That's why we don't put a garment on our face, because our face is Chabad. The garments are on the rest of the body. Now, obviously, you'll ask the question, what about when it's a cold day and we put on a ski mask or some type of thing to cover? Okay, obviously, that's to protect from the cold. But generally speaking, we don't dress up on the panim. Now, I know you could comment, so what about the Muslim women? Well, that's another discussion. But bottom line is that even from a tznius point of view, no one ever suggests you cover a face. So in other words, even the Begashmis, levushim are primarily on the 7 lower faculties, not on the 3 upper faculties. Interesting. Okay, so that's so even in Giluiim, you see that levushim are primarily in the lower levels, not in the higher levels. So for sure, Etzem, which is altogether not in the world of Giluiim. Again, I gave my introduction before because this seems to be completely, well, he's not even talking about machshava anymore. He's talking about now Etzem, where there's no levushim. But as you know, the whole discussion here is about how to be megala atzmus into existence. And the role of levushim, whether it's machshava dibur, is to dress it up in ways we can relate to. Das Elyon, das Tachten. So I am saying a little because I just want us to understand it's not, if you suddenly come here, you realize there's something sounds like a new mimer altogether, new themes. But bear with it and we'll get through it. So now we've established that Levushim are not an Etzem, they're not even on Gimel Rishenus. Now that doesn't mean that Gimel Rishenus you can't put on a garment. In Etzem, altogether there's no role of a garment. A garment doesn't change anything. That's why we say the Etzem and Neshama, even by a Kal Shebekalim, even if a person's Machshava Dibur Maisa, his Levushim, and his behavior, and everything about him, you don't see the Etzem and Neshama. The Etzem and Neshama is not changed. Even if he's wearing soiled garments. The kavanah, of course, is that you want the Etzem to be revealed. That's why you need. But Etzem is not affected. But he's saying here, even the higher levels of Chabad, of the Gimel Rishenis, are also primarily Levushim are in the lower levels. The Gaba Moshe, now we're going to talk about Moshe. What about Moshe? He did put on a garment on his face. The masva. Remember the mask. So the Rebbe Rashab is going to explain what that means. The Gaba Moshe, the Ksiva Yitna Pon of Masva. So then the Pasha Kisisa, it says when he came down from the mountain. So most interpret this was after the second Luchas. There's a different opinion. Some say it was after Luchas Shoshenis, Matan Teda. But regardless, so what did we say? That the Jews couldn't look at him. His face was shining. So bright, they couldn't see him. They couldn't look at him. So Vayitin, what did he do? He put on a mask. Masva. So you just said that upon him there's no Levush. Levush is mainly Gimel Rishenis. Yeshlemer, so the Rebbe Rashab is going to answer, Yeshlemer, Shazel Kumay Dover Nivdel Legamri Hamastir. That this is like a completely separate thing that covers up. In other words, it's not a levush. When you put on a levush, it's a machshava or dibur. It's an expressive. It's not to conceal completely. It's something that you put on whether it's a ha'ara or asius to express the idea. It's in order to express it. It's not in order to completely conceal. The masva had a different role altogether. It wasn't a levush. Its role was a separate entity just to cover up. It's like concealing the whole face. That was its role. That's what he's saying as an answer. He's basically saying it's not a levush. It's a completely separate thing that covered up and concealed. Let's continue. Didn't finish. Va'kirun eir. The lashon there is keren eir. He uses here kirin eir. Why would he use the word kirin here?
Koran oir ponov.
But what does he use with a yud?
That's the same thing.
Okay.
Koran oir ponov.
Okay. Koran oir ponov means rays of light. His face was illuminated. That's where we get the word keren oir. It's interesting, just for the record, Michelangelo, when he he sculpted Moshe, he made two little horns. Because some of the Christian scholars didn't know how to type keren oir. They thought it meant horns of light. So keren also from the word horn. But when you know Hebrew, keren has different meanings. It's not just keren.
Glow.
Huh?
Here it means it glow, shine.
Yeah, I'm telling. My point is they made a mistake. They misinterpreted the word keren. Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah. Keren oir, the light, the glow of light, or the ray of light. Karnei hoid, like the Rebbe used kahos, karnei hoid. The rays, or the rays of light. So he says, the keren oir hu eir atzmi. That's an eir atzmi. Why did Moshe's face were bright? Because he had touched atzmus essentially. He got revealed to the highest levels of Elokus. So it's called the eir atzmi. She'ina ba b'bchinas islapshus. That's not subject. That's not subject to islapshus altogether. Remember we said the Etzem, a garment will not do anything for an Etzem. Because the Etzem is beyond garments. So therefore he's explaining that the masva is not about a garment that's helping reveal and helping channel. The masva was completely a different role altogether. This role was to be an outside force, like a real mask. A mask to make that to be able that you could look at Moshe Rabbeinu, so you should be able to see him. but the Eir was a Eir Atzmi. Okay.
What does he mean with that? What is this massive?
Let me finish the parentheses and we'll see. Let's see. It's a massive a lot. He wants to explain why. He explained that on the ponim there's no levush. L'cheira we see a levush of the mask. So he's explaining that it's not a levush. Let me finish and then we'll go through any questions if you don't mind, okay? So he says like this. And this light that Moshe, this glow from Eir Atzmi, this was added to Moshe after in the Luchas Shnias, the second Luchas. As I said, there are opinions, but most go with the Luchas Shnias. Means this was Yom Kippur when he came down the second time. I'm sorry, when he came down the third time, but he came down with the second Luchas. So that's what he had now was a Keren Eir Ponov. Shem Bechinas Has Talumes Chochma. It says in Medrashim, and Chassidus explains, the Luchas Shnias were the concealed levels of Chochma. The Luchas Sheinish was more revealed. Talumes Chochma means the deeper secrets, the inner secrets of wisdom. Bechinas Pnimius V'atzmis HaChochma. The inner and core of Chochma, Keneda. Okay. So now he's explaining this garment of Masva, what's its role then? So he says, V'yesh lema, V'inyan hester ha-masva. What is this covering of the mask? Yesh lema shezohi slapshus be'inyan ha-birurim. This is a slapshus in inyan ha-birurim. That means that Moshe, the Masva was Moshe relating to birurim. It wasn't a levush on this Eir Atzmi, because the Eir Atzmi you can't put a levush on. This was him relating to birurim, shehi slapshu shalei b'hadraga. Okay, I'll explain all this. Let me read it and I'll explain. Say slapshu shalei. Oh, it's already late. Wow. Let me just finish the parentheses. Say slapshu shalei b'hadraga. That's why it's a masva. A masva is not an extension of the face. It's a complete cover. It's Moshe relating, instead of to Elokus, pure Elokus, he's relating to the birurim that the people are involved in. As it's known, that was what was introduced, a new thing, innovated by the second tablets. Lias ina birurim. There should be birurim. And through this birurim, it will be mamshach primis ha'er, a deeper level of er. The luchas shenis was like er yashar, tzadikim. Its inyan wasn't so much birurim. The luchas shnias that came after Chet HaEgel and after the breaking of the first tablets is involved much more in worldly matters. Had the Jews never did the Chet HaEgel, the luchas shnias would have kept them on a level that was somewhat above existence. The luchas shnias now is a Torah. That's why it says that if the luchas shnias were not given, we wouldn't have Torah Shebal Peh and the Chazal and so on. There's a whole Gemaras about this in the Dorim and Edivin. I'll explain it more in the next class. It's just already getting late. But bottom line is, what he's saying here is the following. I'll just sum up this parentheses. He started off saying about a levush that a garment is a separate entity, whether it's a reflection or in case of machshava, it's like a separate entity that's giving oisius letters. So it's dressing up an idea, so it can be thought. Dibur will be even a further levush, but we're not up to Dibur yet. Then he goes and says that also what levush of machshava is only a garment on the Giluiim, not on Etzem, on the Giluiim of ideas. Right. So then the parentheses, it says the Etzem altogether is not shaykh to levushim. It's not subject to concealment. And it's not subject to in any way of diminishment. Even Giluiim, he said the Gimel Rishenis is also, you don't wear a levush on your face. So then he went, what about Moshe Rabbeinu? So he's explaining that Masva is not a levush. It's not a Gilui of his face in a way that the people can see. It's a cover, altogether covered him. because it was an atzmi that came after the luchas shniyas. What is it in Aveda? The masfra is a relationship with birurim. It's not a levush to reveal what Moshe was experiencing, the atzmi that he received after receiving the second tablets. It's how it relates to birurim, in the words that we've been speaking, a lakus that relates to existence. Moshe's face was a lakus as it relates to a lakus. It was an atzmi, as we learned earlier. That's how I would connect it. So its role is birurim. Now, when you do birurim, you can go ahead and reveal a deeper light. But that's not the masra. The masra is the concealment, complete concealment. So we have here several levels of levushim. Levushim that reveal elikus, but in a diminished way. The masra is a complete cover-up. In order for it to be birurim, there should be existence. And when you do the birurim, you can start reaching to higher levels and deeper levels of light. That's essentially what he's saying here. So basically, Etzem is beyond levushim. Ein Sof, once it starts becoming manifest, is subject to levushim. Depends what level. Higher levels of levushim are more reveal. Lower levels conceal more. And then a masva is a whole different entity. A masva is like a parsa. It's a complete union of tzimtzum, of concealment. In order there should be existence. And then when you refine existence, you can retrace your steps and reconnect to the Etzem and Primis Ha'er, what he calls it. That's how I would explain this. Probably the context of everything we've learned. But you know what? We'll go over it again on Sunday. We'll stop here. I will stop here at the end of the parentheses.